Welcome back. So, this is going to be the last lecture that I'll be giving on Othello. We'll begin with Act 5, Scene 1, and things are really going to pick up as far as the action in the play is concerned in this scene and in this act. Um, Iago realizes that he has been stringing Rodrigo along for a while, and Rodrigo has sort of reached the limits of his patience. I rub this young quat almost to the sense, and he grows angry. Now, whether he kill Cassio or Cassio him, or each do kill the other, every way makes my gain. Live Rodrigo. He calls me to a restitution large of gold and jewels that I bobbed from him as gifts to Desdemona. It must not be. If Cassio do remain, he hath a daily beauty in his life that makes me ugly, and besides the more may unfold me to him, there stand I in much peril. No, he must die. But so, I hear him coming. And so Iago is again talking aloud. He's sort of he makes his plans he thinks on his feet as he makes his plans, doesn't he? Right? He really is very very good at thinking on his feet and making adjustments on the fly as it is. And he reasons to himself that either Cassio or Rodrigo must die. And initially, he says it doesn't matter who kills who, but he realizes that his own benefit is in having Cassio dead, because if his own rather his own benefit is in having Rodrigo dead, or having both of them dead. Actually, it doesn't really matter, right? Because both men, whether it's Rodrigo or it's Cassio, both men pose a danger to him. For the reasons that we just read over here. And so he's going to set these two men upon one another, or he hopes he will. He hopes that Rodrigo will either kill Cassio or Cassio will kill Rodrigo. We see in the scene that Rodrigo attempts to stab Cassio, but he fails. Instead, Cassio wounds Rodrigo, and Iago wounds Cassio, but doesn't kill him. Plot-wise, that's what happens. Now, interestingly enough, as all this is taking place, the entire scene unfolds in the dark, right? And particularly because it's nighttime. Remember, the play begins at nighttime and it ends at nighttime also. The play begins with Brabantio being roused from his sleep, and the play, interestingly enough, ends at night with another character asleep, Desdemona. There may be something there for you to comment upon. Nevertheless, nighttime is important because it's dark, and just as Brabantio could not see that it was Iago who was egging on Rodrigo to wake him up, and it was Iago who was sort of the mastermind behind raising the furor in Brabantio's house, so too Othello does not see everything that has taken place in the darkness of nighttime. He hasn't seen anything, but all he has done, rather, is that he has heard the wounded Rodrigo cry out for help. And he has heard what he thinks is Iago killing Michael Cassio. So, although he hears the wounded Rodrigo calling out for help, he thinks that it is Cassio's cries for help, and he thinks that those cries for help are Cassio being killed by Iago. This is an interesting variation on the previous scene, isn't it, right? We talked about the relationship between the eye and the ear in the previous scene, and here too, Othello is deceived using these same two organs. But this time, it is the information that he's receiving from his ears, right? The information that he's receiving from his ears that isn't corroborated by his eyes. Remember that in Act 4, in that play within a play scene, it was the information that he received through his eyes that weren't corroborated by his ears. But nevertheless, Shakespeare makes a variation on that play within a play scene again to emphasize the importance between the relationship of eye and ear in the play. If you didn't get it in Act 4, Shakespeare gives it to you again in Act 5 with a slight variation, but again to make the same point that eye and ear must agree with one another. If they do not, one can be fooled. One can have one organ in the body give incorrect guidance and counsel to the brain, to the judgment, while the other organ is disabled. Um, um, Othello confuses Roderigo for Cassio, right? And right after Othello confuses Roderigo for Cassio, we have this dialogue. "Oh, help me here," Roderigo says, and Cassio says, "That's one of them." Again, Cassio notes that it's Roderigo who stabbed him. "Oh, murderous slave, oh villain." And what does he do? He stabs Roderigo, and Roderigo immediately recognizes what Iago has been up to. Roderigo immediately realizes that he has been set up by Iago. "Oh, damned Iago, oh, inhuman dog." And Iago says, "Kill men i' the dark? Where be these bloody thieves? How silent is this town? Ho, murder, murder, what may you be? Are you of good or evil?" And so what does Iago do? Iago essentially kills Roderigo with the justification that he is saving Cassio's life. It's a justifiable reason for killing Roderigo, but of course, what Cassio does not know, what no one knows except for Roderigo, is that it is it is Iago who has put Roderigo up to killing Cassio, or trying to kill Cassio in the first place, right? And so Roderigo realizes, right? Roderigo realizes that he's been an unwitting actor of Iago's, but he realizes this too late. We'll ask ourselves if this too late realization appears any time later in the play also. As the scene ends, Iago knows this is the night that either makes me or fordoes me quite. Act 5, Scene 2 continues at night, right? It continues the same events of that dark night. And it begins with Othello entering his bedchamber where Desdemona is asleep. And Othello, rather, I should say, says the following. Again, he is still vacillating about killing his wife. He still, even though he believes that she's been unfaithful, yet there's a part of him that doesn't want to do it, that doesn't want to believe in those suspicions. He says, again, as part of his dialogue, "Yet I'll not shed her blood, nor scar that whiter skin of hers than snow, and smooth as monumental alabaster." These are interesting lines, aren't they, right? These are interesting lines because what does he compare? First of all, notice the way that he describes Desdemona, right? He describes her on the basis of the color of her skin, right? We've never seen Othello sort of take recourse to racial terms in order to judge anyone. And for the first time, he is noticing the racial difference between himself and Desdemona. We ask ourselves, what could have caused this? What could have made Othello so superficial? Notice one other thing. Just as his discourse is tinged with racism. And again, racism need not necessarily be white on black racism, right? Racism can just as easily be black on white racism. Racism works in both directions, right? Racism is a mentality. It's not necessarily based on just a hatred of blacks. Notice that the way in which his discourse is tinged with racism parallels the ways in which his discourse is also tinged with misogyny. And the reason why I say this is that he compares her white skin to that of monumental alabaster. Now, ask yourself, what is alabaster and why this expression monumental alabaster? Well, if you do just a quick search for what alabaster is the material used to make statues or monuments, right? And therefore monumental alabaster. Othello imagines Desdemona as a monument, as a statue, as something that is unchanging, an object, right? And we know that men have treated women as objects from the very beginning of this play, but we've never seen Othello sink to this level before. Here, for the first time, we see it happening. And it's interesting, right, that at the moment when he starts to succumb to racism, he also starts to succumb to misogyny, this idea of women as objects, as monuments. Ask yourself, what is the relationship between giving into racism and giving into misogyny? Is there a relationship between these two things? Interestingly enough, he reasons to himself, yet she must die or else she'll betray more men. Put out the light and then put out the light. His justification for killing his wife is that if she isn't killed, she'll betray more men. Desdemona goes from being his particular wife, right, to being a general whore who keeps on betraying the men whom she comes into contact with. At this moment, Othello starts resembling Brabantio much more than he resembles himself, right, from the first half of the play, right? He starts thinking in very, very misogynistic terms. You can't trust women. First they betray their dads, then they betray their husbands, and then every other man along the way they'll betray. And so Othello says, let me save future men from being betrayed by her. But is this not a sign of his misogyny? Again, he sort of vacillates, balmy breath, that dost almost persuade justice to break her sword. One more. Be thus when thou art dead, and I will kill thee and love thee after. One more, and this the last. And as he says this, she wakes up, doesn't she? And of course, she's frightened, she's worried, she has no idea why Othello would want to kill her, but it's very clear that he's got murder in his eyes. And he says to her, that handkerchief which I so loved and gave thee, thou gavest to Cassio. And Desdemona cries out, no, by my life and soul, send for the man and ask him. She denies that she has given the handkerchief to Cassio. And again, in Othello's mind, there is an exchange of one material good for another. The handkerchief that he believes she's given to Cassio is somehow or other equated with her fidelity, with her chastity, right? Fidelity, something that is immaterial and priceless, something like chastity, is reduced by objectification to something worthless and material, like a handkerchief. Sweet soul, take heed of perjury. Thou art on thy deathbed, I, but not yet to die. And again, he keeps on believing that she is perjuring herself when in fact it is his own blindness, right? And we wonder to ourselves, how much has he been changed, right? What kind of patriarchal anxieties, what kind of misogynistic, mystic anxieties have come over him as a result of Iago's influence, but also his own weaknesses, his own changed position in Cyprus that he didn't have in Venice, and of course she again tries to disabuse her husband of the notion that she cheated on him. And have you mercy too. I never did offend you in my life, never loved Cassio, but with such warranty of heaven as I might love, I never gave him token. By heaven, I saw my handkerchief in his hand. O perjured woman, thou dost stone my heart, and makest me call what I intend to do a murder, which I thought a sacrifice. I saw the handkerchief. Again, notice, over and over and over again, he bases her fidelity on what he sees, on ocular proof. But there is no ocular proof for fidelity or infidelity. He found it then, I never gave it for him. Send for him hither, let him confess a truth. And of course, Othello knows very well that Cassio cannot be sent for, right? Because what has Othello already told Iago to do? He hath confessed. Well, before, again, has Cassio confessed? We know that he has not, right? The confession that Othello thinks Cassio has given is really the substitution that Iago has sort of led Othello to make. But again, Othello makes that substitution himself, right? We wonder to what extent the blame belongs on Othello and to what extent it actually belongs on Othello. What, my lord? That he hath used thee. But has Cassio ever said that he hath used thee? No more than that question of lie with and lie on that I discussed in the last lecture. No more. He has no more confessed that he has used thee than he has confessed that he has lied with Desdemona. How unlawfully he's so convinced of what he wants to believe that there's no turning back. He will not say so. No, his mouth is stopped. Honest Iago hath taken order for it. Othello knows very well, or at least Othello thinks that Cassio has no way of being called to witness, right? He thinks that Iago has already done the deed. He's already killed Cassio. And Desdemona, therefore, realizing that there's no way that Cassio will be able to be brought forth as a witness to say, no, I never cheated on your wife never cheated with me. She says, what, is he dead? Had all his hairs been lives, my great revenge had stomach for them all. Alas, he's betrayed and I am undone. And she starts crying. She starts crying more for the fact that there is no witness to her chastity, and Othello misinterprets her tears as tears for Cassio, the tears of a lost lover. He completely misinterprets all of her signs. Oh, banish me, my lord, but kill me not. But again, the scene ends tragically with Othello smothering her, right? Strangling her in the bedroom, in the very same bed that they'd shared as a married couple. Emilia comes in, and Emilia plays a very, very important role in the scene. We have to note how important she is. She knocks on the door, and Othello tells Emilia, by and by she's dead. 'Tis like she comes to speak of Cassio's death. This is Othello saying that, the reason why Emilia keeps knocking on my door is that Emilia wants to come and tell me the news that Cassio's dead. Again, Othello's still believing that Cassio is dead, and Emilia is going to bring him news that he already knows. But by this time, in his mind, Desdemona is dead. She's still got a few words of life left in her, doesn't she? Cassio, my lord. Emilia comes in and gives him different news that he was expecting to hear. Cassio, my lord, hath killed a young Venetian called Rodrigo. Rodrigo killed? And Cassio killed. He wants to say that Cassio's killed also, but Emilia corrects him. No, Cassio is not killed. Not Cassio killed? Then murder's out of tomb and sweet revenge grows harsh. Othello gets this creeping feeling that something's gone wrong. Why is Cassio not dead? Why is Rodrigo dead, but Cassio not? Oh, falsely, falsely murdered, she's got Desdemona, who we thought was dead, has a few breaths of life left in her. And Emilia says, Alas, what cry is that? That? What? And Othello tries to cover up for what he's done. Out, alas, that was my lady's voice. Help, help, ho! O lady, speak, sweet Desdemona, sweet mistress, speak. A guiltless death I die. Who hath done this deed? And at that moment, when Emilia asks Desdemona, who has killed you? Who has killed you? Desdemona, when she has the opportunity to name Othello as her murderer, she passes on that opportunity. She does not betray her husband, even at the moment of her own death. Nobody. I, myself, farewell. Commend me to my kind Lord. Oh, farewell. She dies really as a martyr, doesn't she? She really does die as a martyr figure. And Othello, in the beginning, tries to cover up for himself. Oh, you heard what she said. It wasn't I. She said so. I must needs report the truth. But again, there's something inside Othello that he realizes that he has been duped. He has been fooled. And even though Desdemona protects him with her dying breath, the guilt that's within Othello over what he's done cannot hide itself. She's like a liar gone to burning hell. 'Twas I that killed her. Othello confesses. He belies what Desdemona has just said, and he confesses that he was the one who smothered and strangled his wife. Oh, the more angel, she and you the blacker devil. Interestingly enough, this racist discourse comes from the mouth of a character whom we've associated more with the opportunistic wife. Why is racism coming from the mouth of someone that as we've discussed in the previous act? This is someone who is an opportunistic person, right? Where is the connection here between racism and misogyny? Just as misogyny need not come just from a white person aimed at a black person, is it possible that misogyny also need not come from the mouth of a man aimed at a woman? That perhaps misogyny can be vocalized, expressed, believed as much by women as it is by men? We have to ask ourselves this question because just as we noted before, racism and misogyny were linked together in the same dialogue. It seems like we're getting the same thing here in Emilia's dialogue as well. Othello says about Desdemona, she turned to folly, she was a whore. Emilia says, thou dost belie her, and thou art a devil. Notice, we're going back to the same racist discourse about Othello that we heard in Act 1, Scene 1. We're right back where we started, where Othello is now being called once again a devil, once again black. He's once again being referred to in the same racist terms. And again, the dialogue between Othello and Emilia is fascinating for the ways in which it brings racism and misogyny together. She was as false as water. Thou art rash as fire to say that she was false. Oh, she was heavenly true. Is it possible that we are viewing a dialogue between a black character who is misogynistic and a white character who is racist? And the character who's misogynistic happens to be a man, and the character who is racist happens to be a woman, but it could just as easily have been the other way around. Othello says, Cassio did top her. Again, he wants to tell Emilia what he believes to be true. Cassio did top her. Ask thy husband else. And here, for the first time in the play, for the first time, Othello communicates what Iago has been doing to him, to another character, right? We've never heard Othello communicate the ways in which Iago has been poisoning him to any other character. And here, for the first time, it happens between Othello and Emilia. Oh, I were damned beneath all depth in hell, but I did proceed upon just grounds to this extremity. Thy husband knew it all. My husband? And again, the pieces start to fall into place at this point, don't they? Thy husband, that she was false to wedlock, aye, with Cassio. Nay, had she been true, if heaven would make me such another world, of one entire and perfect chrysolite, I'd not have sold for it. My husband? Aye, 'twas he that told me first. An honest man he is, and hates the slime that sticks on filthy deeds. My husband, she keeps on, she is in complete disbelief that it was her husband, Iago, that put Othello up to murdering Desdemona. What needs this iteration, woman? I say, thy husband. O mistress, villainy hath made mocks with love. My husband say that she was false. And again, these lines, villainy hath made mocks with love. We remember the advice that Desdemona had given to Emilia earlier in the play. You remember what she told her. Desdemona said to Emilia, do not trust your husband. He is a profane and liberal counselor. Do not mind his counsel. And at this moment, Emilia realizes just how true Desdemona was in the counsel and advice that she gave her. But it's too late, isn't it? Desdemona is already dead. And Iago has already done his damage. And Emilia cries out, thou hast not half that power to do me harm as I have to be hurt. O gull, O dolt, as ignorant as dirt, thou hast done a deed. I care not for thy sword. I'll make thee known, though I lost 20 lives. Help, help. And it is the more. Again, we go back to that same kind of racist discourse. It is the more that hath killed my mistress, murder, murder. Take note of one thing, class. Although she is outing Othello as the blacker devil that has killed Desdemona, at the same time that she is using all this racist discourse to justifiably out Othello as a murderer, she makes no mention of her own complicity in Iago's scheme. At no point, up till this point, she has not said anything to anyone, including Desdemona, and even including Othello. She has not made any mention of the fact that she was the one who stole the handkerchief and gave it to her husband. Is this what misogyny does? Does misogyny cover its own tracks by means of other kinds of discrimination? And another kind of discrimination is racism. Is that how one type of prejudicial behavior justifies itself? By using the cover of another type of discriminatory behavior to assuage its feelings, to make itself feel like it's not so bad? Something for you to think about. Montano, Graciano, and Iago enter, and here Iago will be revealed to be what he is. And Emilia confronts her husband. She says to him, speak, for my heart is full. She demands that her husband explain whether or not what Othello is saying is true. And Iago says, I told him what I thought and told no more than what he found himself was apt and true. And we wonder whether or not Iago is factually accurate in saying what he's saying. But did you ever tell him she was false? I did. You told a lie, an odious damned lie upon my soul, a lie, a wicked lie. She false with Cassio. Did you say with Cassio? With Cassio, mistress, go to, charm your tongue. And what does he want to do? He wants to shut his wife up. And Emilia will not charm her tongue. She will not stay quiet. She will not be gagged and muzzled. I am bound to speak. My mistress here lies murdered in her bed, and here it is Emilia who not only outs Othello, but also outs her husband's complicity in all this. And your reports have set the murder on. Nay, stare not, masters. It is true indeed. And so, the other characters are completely stunned. Iago keeps on telling his wife to shut up, hold your peace, and she keeps on talking. And Iago tries to stab his wife. And unfortunately, they are not able to stop Iago. He calls her a villainous whore. And finally, Emilia comes out. And when he tries to stab her, when Iago tries to stab her, then and only then does Emilia realize it was stupid of me to keep my own complicity in all this a secret, let the truth out. I found the handkerchief. I gave it to my husband. Filth, thou liest. By heaven, I do not, I do not. And so there's a lot being said here about at what point does misogynistic behavior, does racist behavior recognize itself? When it's too late, the play seems to suggest to us. Emilia is killed. And as we see in the dialogue that follows, I'm not going to read it, but it's on the screen in front of you. The entire plot that Rodrigo and Iago had been working on to kill Cassio is undone, is revealed through a series of letters that are found. Othello and Cassio speak, and it becomes very clear when Othello and Cassio speak clearly that Othello has been undone. Iago is caught at the end of the play, but not before Othello has to deal with his own actions in killing his wife. And so I will end with this last bit of dialogue that Othello has, soft you a word or two, before they can even arrest Othello and sentence him to death. Othello speaks the following lines: soft you a word or two before you go. I have done this state some service, and they know it. No more of that. I pray you in your letters, when you shall these unlucky deeds relate, speak of me as I am, nothing extenuate, nor set down aught in malice. Then must you speak of one that loved not wisely but too well, of one not easily jealous, but being wrought perplexed in the extreme, of one whose hand, like the base Indian, threw a pearl away, richer than all his tribe, of one whose subdued eyes, albeit unused to the melting mood, dropped tears as fast as the Arabian trees their medicinal gum. Set you down this, and say besides that in Aleppo once, where a malignant and turbaned Turk, bearded Venetian, introduced the state, I took by the throat the circumcised dog and smote him thus. And with these words, Othello stabs himself. And so, here is something for you to think about. And I do want you to really give this some independent thought. This Turk, which we thought had disappeared when that tempestuous storm came and wiped out the naval fleet, that Turk that Othello never really had to fight. He never really had to defend the Venetians against this Turk oddly surfaces at the very end of the play yet again. And he surfaces in Othello's final bit of dialogue before Othello apparently commits suicide in an act that nevertheless invokes killing the malignant and turbaned Turk and smiting him thus with the sword. Oddly enough, Othello seems to think that he's killing the turbaned Turk even as he is stabbing himself. And so, one of the questions that I may ask you to think about is why? Why does the Turk return to the play? Why does Othello think he is killing the Turk when he's actually committing suicide? These are all super duper important and relevant questions, and your thoughts on this matter are really, really welcome. Certainly, we can talk about the ways in which Othello's personal and public commitments have been interchanged opportunistically, and we can also think about the kinds of patriarchal injustices that have taken place to Othello's advantage and at the end of the play against Othello's advantage that may have occasioned these final actions of the play. Again, these are all things for you to think about and perhaps write a paper about as well. The play ends obviously with the tragedy of Othello having committed suicide, but we wonder to what extent this is a play that has reflected back on a Venetian society, not just this man and this woman, but a society in which racism, patriarchy, misogyny, influence, and not only influence, but particularly counsel, and counsel given by the eye and the ear, have all played a role in concluding the play in this way. These are all the issues that we've been discussing all along as far as Othello is concerned. And so when we consider Othello's final concluding act of suicide, we wonder to ourselves, to what extent have all of these factors played a role in Othello's decision to kill himself? I'll leave you with that. There's a lot to think about. I hope you enjoyed this play, and we will then move on to the next lecture will be on our next play in the semester.